Hi everyone, I just recently finished reading Rebecca, and so I'm going to review the book and also give a quick summary. To begin, this book was written in 1938, which somewhat surprised me because the author has a very particular writing style that reminds me a lot of Jane Eyre, which was written around 1847. The writing style tends to be more formal English, which makes it seem like the book was written in the early 19th century, but it was really written and published in 1938. I think that's one of the reasons why I like this book so much, just because the writing is so formal and the book is written very well. I also think the author does an amazing job with her figurative language. For example, on page 9, she says, "She is comparing me to Rebecca, and sharp as a sword, the shadow came between us." That really stood out to me, and I just think that the author uses really descriptive language and a lot of figurative language to get her point across. When I first bought this book, I thought it was going to be more of a horror story involving supernatural powers, especially because the back of the book states, "She realizes how vast a shadow his late wife, Rebecca," which is Max's wife who passed away, "will cast on their lives, introducing a lingering evil that threatens to destroy their love from beyond the grave." So I thought that this was going to be a supernatural horror story with Rebecca haunting them and ghosts and all of those kinds of things. But it was actually really surprising that this is more of a psychological thriller where the narrator is so paranoid about this perfect wife that was Rebecca that she keeps thinking of, and she keeps thinking of Rebecca as this perfect person, and she feels as though she will never be able to live up to the standards that Rebecca set, or at least what she thought that Rebecca had set. She created a whole idea of who Rebecca was, even though she didn't really know much about Max's former wife. I think it's interesting that the narrator is never mentioned by her first name, and she's only known as Mrs. De Winter, which is Max's last name. And I think that this kind of proves the point that she was trying to be more of a shadow and trying to be more like Rebecca, especially because she thought that Rebecca was so well loved and accepted by everyone in the household. So the book starts off with the narrator working as a companion. She works for Mrs. Van Hopper kind of as a servant, but also to learn the ways of the upper class. During her time, she meets Max De Winter, who was taking a vacation away from his home. He ends up spending a lot of time with her. When Mrs. Van Hopper decides that they are going to go to the United States, this is when the narrator expresses her concerns to Max, and Max offers for her to marry him. This is extremely shocking. I knew I was surprised because they had only spent so much time together, but believe it or not, she accepts the offer despite their age gap and decides to marry him and move with him to Manderley. During her time in Manderley, she is constantly paranoid, feels as though she does not have enough experience being in the high or upper class, that she is always second-guessing herself, especially when interacting with the people like the staff members. She constantly feels as though Rebecca, which is Max's former wife, was this perfect person who everyone loved and accepted, and she feels that she'll never be able to fill those shoes and that she's just always going to be in the shadow of Rebecca. The whole time, she second-guesses everything she does and is just so nervous to interact with anyone. We are told that Max's former wife, Rebecca, had died from drowning in a river when she went sailing alone. However, this is not the truth that is revealed towards the end. As the book progresses, there are a lot of eerie moments that are somewhat psychological, but also happening in reality. And it's really interesting to hear the narrator's perspective. For example, in chapter 16, Mrs. Danvers, who is one of the servants or assistants for the household, decided to kind of trick the wife and have her dress in an outfit that was similar to what Rebecca looked like. And when she surprised her husband was furious and wouldn't talk to her for the rest of the evening. So this kind of prank that Mrs. Danvers decided to do to trick her and to kind of punish her in a way and make her ruin her relations with her husband was really shocking and just kind of scary as well. Also, when Mrs. Danvers sees the narrator in Rebecca's former room, she takes no hesitation to show her around the room, show her all the old clothes in a way that's kind of scary. Then around chapter 19, there is a boat that is having trouble in the river, and that's when they find a body. And that is when Max tells the narrator, his wife, that he was the one that killed Rebecca because she was not as perfect as the narrator thought she was. So Max tells the narrator everything, that he did not have a good relationship with Rebecca and that he ended up killing her. And You'd think that this would have made the narrator super upset, but actually she's relieved and she wants to continue her relationship with him. She feels completely free of all the psychological terror she's had because she realizes that Rebecca was not this perfect person that she had made her out to be, but yet all of the suffering she had was psychological. It's interesting because I had expected her to leave her marriage, especially because her husband was a murderer, but she decided to continue to be with him and she felt much more relief and happier, which is just such an interesting theme. There's a whole lot of action and suspense towards the end. Max goes to court, people are suspicious, including Rebecca's former cousin. However, they end up being able to leave the court and the narrator and Max are able to return back to their home in Manderley. It is not until they return home that they see that Mrs. Danvers has burned the entire house down. This is just the way that it ends, and the entire last chapter is very interesting because the narrator is dreaming as she's sleeping while they're driving back to the estate, and then when she wakes up, she sees the house and the estate burning, and it almost seems as though it is a dream and not real. Overall, I would rate Rebecca 5 stars, especially with the theme of the power of mentality and how much your own mindset can dictate the way that you perceive things. The only negative that I will say is that the beginning first third of the book is a lot about the narrator's new life in Manderley, and it's a lot of just repetition and nothing really happens toward that part, and it's just a lot of writing and a lot of unnecessary information. However, it does correlate with the author's writing style, which is extremely detailed, making sure that the reader doesn't miss out on anything. One quote that really highlights how the narrator allowed the former life of Rebecca to really influence the way that she perceived things is on page 262, which says, "One day the woman would grow old or tired or different, and Maxim would not love her anymore. But Rebecca would never grow old. Rebecca would always be the same. And her I could not fight. She was too strong for me." And then she just is imagining all of these scenarios and all of these assumptions. She makes a ton of assumptions about the way that people are perceiving her and makes it seem as though everyone hates her because she will never be as perfect as the image of Rebecca that she created in her own mind. Of course, people like Mrs. Danvers and some of the other people, such as Rebecca's cousin, really thought that Rebecca was an amazing individual, but Max or Maxim had a completely different opinion of her. So it is definitely contrary to the idea that the narrator had depicted in her mind, and she really should not have worried so much about that individual and focus more on who she is and who she can be as a wife to Max. So I think that this book really highlights the power of psychology and the way that our minds can play tricks on us, or how we can allow our mindset to kind of determine how we view how people interact with us and how we interact with the world or perceive the world as well. So overall, I think Rebecca is a classic for a reason. It's stated to be the Anthony Award winner, best novel of the century, and I can clearly see why. Thank you so much for listening to my book summary. I will see you in the next book review.